Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
Doing great. How about you, Eric?
Fantastic. We are
Thanksgiving kind us.
wrapping up Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, I had a wonderful time with my 20 people over, family and close friends and stuff, and looking forward to being a grandpa in a couple of weeks. So it's cool stuff.
Very cool. Yes.
And
We
here
had
we
a uh, we
it's
had
the
a much smaller family gathering.
yeah, but it's kind of funny. Here we are in Fickle, New England. I'm 20 miles north of you, and for 2 days they've been talking about this snowstorm that's supposed to last for a day and a half, and so on and so forth. And you're 20 miles south of me. You got nothing on the ground. I have maybe 3 inches with school canceled and stuff like that, but nothing much is really going on. So the first snowfall always looks nice, though.
Yeah, well, welcome to winter in New England. That's.
So
So, as we kick off the holiday season, we're going to talk today about creating processes. Now, what does that have to do with kicking off the holiday season? Well, we all have holiday traditions, getting together with family, specific meals that we make, different activities that we do. And we do the same things year after year because they create an environment of joy and warmth. Well, what we're doing with these traditions is we are creating processes that will generate the feeling that we want. Because when you have the same traditional meal and it's prepared the same way, the recipe doesn't change, you get the same result. And most of our holiday traditions are based around this, doing the same thing year after year to create that feeling of warmth and camaraderie and family. And what we're doing is creating processes. So, what we're going to talk about today is how we're creating these processes to create different efficiencies, different feelings, and to make sure you're creating that same experience time and time again.
yeah, and I mean, obviously, you brought up a good point. In preparing for this, I was kind of looking at this more from like business projects and so on and so forth. But you bring up a wonderful point as far as holiday traditions and so on and so forth. As I said, I mean, we had 20 people over for Thanksgiving, and we've had a lot of other events at the house. And there's certain things that you got to do every single time. You have to make up a list of who's coming. You have to prepare the house. You have to, do a lot of other things as far as cooking and that kind of stuff, which I totally leave to my wife. And but there's so many different things that go into that, and obviously, for a process, the most important thing is to just chunk down the items that have to be done, prioritize them, get them organized, and put them down on paper or in some type of a project management system, so that you can make it work the same every time. And obviously, a lot of successful businesses are there because they do the same thing every single time. We've talked about uh, other things such as in the E-Myth Revisited, and building up a business where you can expect the same result every single time that you go there, as opposed to going there one time and having a great experience, and then the next time it's totally different. It's because they have these processes down, written down on paper, and they do the same thing every single time. And it takes upfront organization, but once you have that down, you got something really good going.
Right. And most people get very nervous when you start talking about processes and operations. It sounds so complicated. But the main reason that I bring up holiday traditions is because when you look at it that way, it becomes simpler. And one of the simplest processes that people follow all the time is a recipe. And it's simply a list of everything you need in the amounts you need it, and then step by step how you put those pieces together. And you can actually use that format for any project. You sit down, you figure out exactly everything you're going to need, how much of it you're going to need, and then put step by step how you turn those supplies or those skill sets, depending on what your project is, into the finished project. And when you do this, that project can be done over and over again, always getting the same result, creating the same experience. And that's something that's very important for businesses. You're not just providing a service or selling a product, you're creating an experience. And that experience is becoming more and more important because companies like Best Buy, for example, or Target, there's absolutely no reason that you can't go to Amazon and get the same things as going to Best Buy or going to Target. So Best Buy and Target have tried to create experiences coming into the store, where things are located, the lighting, the fact that you can get help, that you can talk to an electronics expert at Best Buy. They create these experiences, and every one of those experiences is created by putting down a process that all of their employees are expected to follow.
Yeah, and obviously the difference between personal experiences and doing things online. Here we are talking on Cyber Monday, but it's really really nice to be able to go out and do that. I mean, I'm looking for a new TV or whatever. What I want to do is rather than go on to Amazon, I'd rather just go look at them first, do some research online to see what's going on. There's a whole lot of different things you can do as far as that goes, going to Consumer Reports, looking at other ratings and so on and so forth. But there's something to be said for the personal experience. And what you're talking about, I love the word recipe. Obviously, I like to do research on things that I'm going. As I said, I was looking more at business projects and came down with this article saying 5 steps to getting a project done. And the 5 steps, number one, is collecting all the work related items. And obviously, in your recipe thing, that's the different
Right.
things you need to do to
That's
make
your
it
yeah, that's your ingredient list.
your ingredient list. And then once you have your ingredient list, number two is develop a process. Okay, what are you going to do with these things? You're not putting the frosting on before you bake the cake, that kind of thing. So, what are the tasks and so on and so forth that have to be done? And a lot of times you're doing this with a team, even if you're throwing a house party. Obviously, I got to make sure that the house is set up with the tables and chairs and so on and so forth. We got to plan on the timing for the meal and whatever. So, number three is getting organized. And this is where coming up with like a management tracking thing as far as when things are going to get done and by whom is really, really important. Step number four is setting up a time to review things. This is getting together. If you're doing a project at work, it's getting together with the team to go over where you are, where you're going, and so on and so forth. So it's really, really important to review things. And then number five is instead of just waiting to do things when everything is in place, is just dig in and get to it, do things. So I love the recipe thing as far as okay, how are we going to get this meal done? First, we're going to go shopping and get all these things. This is what we're going to do to it, and so on and so forth. Um, so I think we're talking about recipes for projects here.
Exactly. And there are so many lessons, management lessons, organization lessons that you can learn from professional kitchens and recipes. Anthony Bourdain, in one of his books, talked about the fact that when he goes into his kitchen, everything has a specific place. So he doesn't have to waste time finding things. When they go to cook a meal, when they cook a dish, all the ingredients are out so that they know, okay, I've got everything set up. Professional kitchens are set up in stations. So you've got one area where one thing is done and just that one thing. And then you move on to the next station. So there's different, you can take lessons from this and apply them to businesses. And the order that you do things in is very important. Like you use the example with the cake, you don't put the frosting on before you bake it. I've spoken to a number of retail people, and the people that I've spoken to worked at the Apple store, but prior to working at the Apple store, they worked at other retail locations. And they told me one of the things that sets the Apple Store apart, why the experience is so different, is the way they train the employees. Now, it's what they learn is pretty much the same thing. No matter if it's Best Buy or Walmart or Apple, they all teach the same lessons. But what these employees noticed was the order that it was taught. Because at Apple, the first thing they were taught was how to service the customer. At other stores, the first thing they were taught was how to avoid theft and how to avoid product loss. So it's a big difference because one, you're putting the customer first, the other, you're protecting yourself from the customer first. And just learning the same things in that different order created a different environment for the employees. It was okay, our job is taking care of the customer, not taking care of the store. And that experience from the employees spills over into a better customer experience. So the order that you put these ingredients together is very important.
Absolutely. And obviously, a good customer experience turns your customers into your business development people because they're going to talk you up and other people are going to go see you. You're going to get the reputation. Whereas on the other side, if you get that reputation where it's just about the company, and even though you got good stuff, it's not about the customer and you're going to have a lousy experience, that word's going to spread also. So,
Right.
one of the things that we have talked about in the past is time management systems. And probably a couple of years ago, we reviewed a book called "Eat That Frog," which is
Yes.
one different techniques for time management. And a few of the things that you were talking about, again, getting back to the recipe thing. Tip number one is set the table. Decide exactly what you want. Clarity is essential. Write down goals and objectives before you begin. Uh, Preparing thoroughly is another one. It's proper prior preparation prevents poor performance. That's a mouthful. And following that is doing your homework, which is identifying all the different things that have to get done. We also talked about slicing and dicing the task, breaking the large tasks down into smaller chunks. So, uh, bringing back that old book, Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy, it's just 21 chapters of different tips that you can have. The book is about 100 pages long, and there's a quick exercise afterwards. And you'll probably put sticky notes on the chapters that you like to help you out. So, um, a lot of these different books are attack the same thing in different ways, but time management is really, really important. And getting organized in the first place is the way to be very, very efficient with your time management. That's tool number one.
Yes, time management is crucial for any project. And creating a process to manage your time is important. And it can be as simple as a checklist or a schedule that you stick to. In fact, one of the time management methods that I've looked into that's been promoted by the Harvard Business Review is the fact that when you have a project, you don't necessarily have a deadline implicit in that project. It's just this is something that has to be done. And the first thing they suggest is put a deadline on it. Even if it's an arbitrary deadline, don't treat it as arbitrary. Decide what the deadline is going to be and meet your deadlines because that forces you to do things more efficiently. There's an old saying that a project will expand to fit the time allotted. So if you allot a lot of time because there's no real deadline, it's going to expand to fit all of that time and you're not going to get a lot done.
Yeah, setting a deadline, even if you miss it, you can always set a new one. But having something to take a look at is really, really important. We talk about having the beginning with the end in mind, which is right out of the 7 habits of highly effective people. Part of that is planning on when it needs to be done. Um, in another article I read, though, a lot of times we're going to have a list of what has to be done in the project, when it's going to be done by, and so on and so forth. And what it's really, really important to do is to track your progress. And this article says that this person once read an article about having a done list is just as important as having a to do list. The bottom line is it's actually going to pump you up when you're crossing these things off and listening to different things that you've accomplished along the way. So it's really, really important to do that. And the last thing on this is treat yourself when you finish. Celebrate that you've accomplished something. So a lot of it is playing brain games with yourself. However, setting those deadlines, tracking your progress, taking patting yourself on the back for every little step that you've accomplished instead of waiting until the whole thing's done to saying, wow, I finished. It's really, really important. So, again, you got to work on that person in the mirror and you got to work as a team. These are great ways to do it.
Right. And, time is a very important factor in your project planning and your process creation. Going back to the example again of recipes, there's always a time factor. How long something has to be in the oven, how long it has to cool. When you're doing baking, how long the dough has to sit before putting it in the oven. Time is an important factor. And when you put processes together for business, time is still an important factor because your client doesn't want to wait forever for your project to be done. If you're running a retail operation, your customers don't want to be milling around the store forever waiting for somebody to help them. Or if they've asked a question, they don't want it to take forever for you to get back to them with the answer. So, time is a very important factor when putting processes together. And that's also why most more sophisticated project management software use what's called a Gantt chart rather than a simple list. Because a list, you can schedule things. This happens at this time, this happens at this time. With a Gantt chart, you have the flexibility that instead of saying, item 3 happens at this time, it's item 3 happens one day after the completion of item 2. So you have a schedule that's dependent on completion. And this way you have item 1 has to be done at this time. Item 2 starts when item 1 ends. Item 3 starts one day after item 2 ends, or something like that. So you're putting in time into the process.
Yeah, and actually, it's basically the following part of the recipe process as far as you got the items, and this is what you're going to do. I did some work a while ago for a home improvement contractor, and they have software that runs the whole projects and so on and so forth. And one of the views that you have is exactly as you say, the Gantt thing, which just lists the logical processes to how things are going. And obviously, when you're talking about contracting, you're talking about ordering materials, getting them in there, making sure that the people who work there are there in place, making sure subcontractors are there. I mean, it's really, really a high tech thing to come up and do a home renovation, especially if it's a larger job. So it's really, really important to have that down there. And a visual thing where you're just tracking everything is a great tool out there. And I know that there's software out there that can help people do that.
Yeah, there are loads of project management software that range in cost from free to thousands of dollars. You need to look into these, figure out which one fits your budget, fits the way you work, and fits the size of your projects. Most people can get by with a lower level software. They don't need all of the bells and whistles. But when you're talking about something like a construction project, that's where these more complicated project management tools come into play.
Yeah, and if you're doing something simpler yourself, uh, obviously you can probably get away with just taking out a spreadsheet and writing down the different tasks that have to be done to get this project completed. And what you're able to do then is just sort those out so that you can put things in the logical sequence that they have to be done and you can track things that way. But I mean, obviously, if you're doing something that's very complicated, you're going to need something bigger to help you out. But really, you have to start with, again, a list of what you have to do. It's the ingredients that are going into the recipe.
Right. And taking a step further back, we've been talking about the recipe and talking about how it creates an experience. But before you start this recipe, you need to define what that experience that you're creating is. I mean, when we're talking about holiday traditions, most of us are trying to recreate something that we did as children, something our parents did, sometimes something our grandparents and great grandparents did that have been passed down the line. So we know what our end goal is because it's something we've actually grown up with. When you're talking about a business process, you need to make sure that you know what that end goal is and how it looks both from the employee's point of view, from management's point of view, and from the customer point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to put all the different pieces together depending on what you're doing. So, again, a lot of this is kind of the philosophy that came out of the E Myth. When you're building a business to get things done, obviously, you have to have your purpose and your why as far as what you're doing. You have to have your tools in place as far as making sure that you get things done. But it also comes down to organizing your people, organizing all the different departments, and that kind of thing. So, uh, the more that you put into it up front and have that down on paper, the easier it is, number one, to get it done and go back and tweak it again. But the easier it is once you have that going is to repeat it every single time, which is really, really the purpose of doing something, especially in a business. Again, you want to be consistent.
Right. And, we've mentioned the E Myth. One important flaw in the E Myth Revisited that Michael Gerber, the author, actually addresses in his second book, E Myth Mastery, is that it's very important not to forget why you're creating this process. The process is meant to make things easier on you, but it's also meant to create that feeling not just in your customers, but in you. What Michael Gerber found um, after publishing E Myth Revisited is that people were getting so caught up in the creation of the process and simply following the process that they were no longer enjoying their business. You have to make sure that the end goal of this process creates an experience for you and your employees as well as your customer. Otherwise, what tends to happen is that the process falls by the wayside because people get tired, they get lackadaisical, and they don't get anything from the process. So over time, they leave out steps, they cut corners, and the process falls apart. You need to remember when you're putting together a process, it's just as important that the person doing the process has an experience as well.
Yeah, in the E Myth, he starts with the primary aim as far as what you're doing, and obviously, when we talk about things, we all have to have our own personal why and why we're doing what we're doing, and it comes from the inside, and it's really, really important to be working towards that because again, if you're not feeling great inside for what you're doing and that you're contributing and you're actually feeding yourself as far as what your primary aim in life is, it's just not going to work out. And once you get that going, in the E-Myth, he does have all these different systems and so on and so forth. And yes, it's very, very easy to just get caught up in that and forget about why you're doing it in the first place. So it's really, really important. We talk about having our uh, statement out in front of us of purpose and looking at that every single day and keeping working on that. uh, it's really so important to make sure that it's all coming from within you and it's going towards your primary aim, because otherwise you are just going to be working through the process and you're going to get frustrated. So got to be able to go back to that.
Exactly. Again, the most important thing to remember is that the whole idea of a process isn't just to get something done, it's to create that experience. And that's, again, becoming more and more important in work because you're talking about employee engagement, you're talking about customer engagement. And the processes are meant to create an environment that both employees and customers enjoy coming back to, because you want to be able to create that same feeling, that same holiday tradition year after year.
Yeah, and if you can't create that in yourself first, it's going to be impossible to find and create that for other people. So it's really, again, it's very, very important. You had a reason for doing it in the first place. If you're swaying from that and getting caught up in all the day-to-day minutia, you got to be able to go back to that.
All right. And that's really it. Most people look at processes as the day-to-day minutia, and the process isn't that. The process is to get you past the day-to-day minutia. It's so you don't have to figure something out every time you do it. It's so no matter who does it, you get the same result, even though different people are doing it. Ideally, you should have enough flexibility in your process that even if you have to substitute one or two items, you're still creating that same process, the same product, the same service, the same experience. Now, you don't want your process to be completely random. I wrote an article a number of years ago called The Worst Grilled Cheese Sandwich. And what this was is I was discussing a recipe I found for a grilled cheese sandwich. And the problem was the ingredient list was so vague when it told you, okay, you need 4 slices of cheese. And it listed like 18 types of cheese that you could use. Well, guess what? You're not going to get the same grilled cheese sandwich every time you do this recipe if you're just choosing cheese at random. So you do need to have a structure in your process to make sure that end product stays the same. If your end product can vary widely, it's not a good process. So we're just coming up on the end of our time. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners this week?
I'm hungry. I want a recipe. No, I'm just kidding. Really, it's what you're going to do. Very, very important. Why are you going to do that? And I do love the recipe approach. Write down the ingredients that have to go into this project, get it organized, put the process together, do it and review it. And, most importantly, just enjoy the ride, because if you're not enjoying the ride, whoever you're doing it for is going to see that too. So,
yeah, I think the recipe example is probably the most important thing for our listeners, because that gives you everything you need to create your process. It's your ingredient list, it's the amounts of the supplies you're going to need, it's the order that everything has to be put together, it's the conditions that have to be created, temperature, it's the timing that everything needs to do. And all of those things need to be put into your process. It's, the supplies, amounts, order, conditions, and time. All of those elements go into creating a process that's going to allow you to create an experience that will bring your family back together every year, that will bring your customers back on a regular basis, that encourage your employees to engage on a regular basis. So take all of those elements and put together that process for the experience you want to create. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can also find us on the Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. See you then.